I've also heard you talk about how there's really no proven correlation between thoughts and actions. Like this assumption that if you have some suicidal thoughts and then you tell a doctor, which is a whole nother article you wrote, be careful what you say, how honesty leads to the trauma of unnecessary psychiatric hospitalization. Just because you opened up a little bit about some obscure thought, they blow it up into a bigger thing than it really is. But this idea of thoughts, we don't even know where they come from, but this idea that thoughts and actions are 100% correlated, like, but sometimes they do spill over into these really violent, horrible actions due to these drugs. I mean, how do we unpack the risk profile of someone we might love who is on these drugs, who is convinced they need them, and we're not going to be able to overcome a doctor's, manipulation? I mean, I just don't know what to do to protect someone from themselves or their own thoughts. Or do these drugs cause those violent thoughts to spill over into actions at an increased rate? Like, what are some of your thoughts between the correlation between thoughts and actions and kind of the assumptions that we make around that?
Yeah, there's two separate avenues that we'll go down to in this discussion, and it's a great discussion point. So, first of all, I've been able to talk to so many people who've been able to articulate the experience to me, so I can articulate the experience to you and your listeners. One particular client stands out because all drugs can induce this. Like even a steroid can induce this that you're, provided in another setting. Not the anabolic steroids, but like the steroids that might be provided for some inflammatory condition. I had a client who was, has a history of sexual assault and pretty severe PTSD, and she was administered a medical treatment. It was some form of a steroid, and it induced in her these intrusive obsessive thoughts. And she scheduled an emergency session with me because of this new drug which was prescribed. And she was able to explain, I know I don't want to kill myself, but it's telling me, my thoughts are telling me I have to. So that is her being able to observe her own internal experience. It's different than anything she's ever experienced. And thankfully, most people know that this isn't them, and they'll either stop taking the drug or they'll call their doctor and they'll deal with it. These are these induced drug reactions. I had her go to the emergency room to be monitored because this was a drug reaction, and they still tried to psychiatrically hospitalize her. Like, this is what happens in our system. There's so many people on so many different drugs, and the doctors rarely know that the drug can do these things. Another great book is Your Drug May Be the Problem, and outlines this. So they go and they're treated like they're a psychiatric patient. And so there's really a difference that people can describe when it's a drug-induced state of consciousness that's different. Now, not everybody. So you bring up a good point, like David Carmichael. And it's probably due to his own, genetic makeup that it just flooded his system to such a degree it created psychosis. And psychosis is different because you're not connected to reality, right? So this young girl could tell me I'm having these thoughts while David Carmichael didn't know the difference, right? He's in that dreamlike state. And so it induced psychosis in a percentage of people. Well, how is that different than the average person? Well, there's something called cognitive fusion. Cognitive fusion is where you get attached to your thoughts like they're real. You see this in conditions like OCD is probably the most great example. Is you have a thought, it's just like in action. And this is where someone like me as a psychologist works with somebody to learn the skills to be able to observe your internal experience without acting on it. There is a difference between I had a thought of suicide to escape this problem that I'm facing, or I'm thinking deeply about life and death, the purpose of life, the meaning of life, whether it's worth it being here, which is a typical human kind of response, versus I want to kill myself. And when you talked about the therapy industry before, is we're churning out therapists who are not attending rigorous academic institutions. They're going to get a master's degree. They're not really vetted. It's not academically rigorous. And so there's a lot of people who are fear-based, and they're pushed by this fear. Like the worst thing that could happen is someone could kill themselves under your care. So you become hyper vigilant to anything that might suggest that someone could end their life. And again, it goes back to creating a reality with your client. You're now inducing that fear-based response where someone is actually afraid of their own internal experiences. Like if you're afraid of your own thoughts or your own feelings, what you're going to do is you're going to exacerbate the condition. You're going to get worse. And that is what has happened as part of this mass conditioning over 35 plus years is we now have a population that is actually afraid of their own thoughts and feelings because we've been brainwashed to be afraid of them, like there's something wrong with our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And smart people know this. Don't tell me the drug companies don't know this. Don't tell me those who want to have power and control don't understand this is exactly going to be the reaction for a population. The United States is not pushing and shaping a population of people to be resilient. We're pushing and shaping a population of people to be drug dependent and fragile. I remember back like in the 80s and before, there used to be public service announcements on TV. You know, it could be like from it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? Or this is your brain on drugs. So they used to communicate like in any way possible that like the use of drugs and the just say no aspect of that time is like, hey, this is going to harm our population. Like this is going to harm our young people. We need to have these resilient and strong, well functioning younger generation. This is the future of our country. You don't see that anymore. You know, you're trying to assign mental illness, fragility, and put them on drugs, knowing that the drugs have all these reactions. So your question is a complicated one because it has to do with clinical evaluation and knowing the person. And so, yes, you know the difference. Like this is out of the ordinary for who this person is. And what happened prior to this is they were provided a drug. So it's one of the things that's really important. What changes have had? Have you put anything into your system that wasn't there previously? Another person I want to mention is Kim Wizak. So she's someone who's on the board of my nonprofit organization, the Conscious Clinician Collective. She calls herself the accidental advocate because her husband, Woody, in 2003, job-related stress, difficulty sleeping, is, again, prescribed an SSRI, Zoloft, by his doctor for sleep, not a drug approved for sleep. Someone who was a marathon runner, life of the party, no history of any mental health problems at all, gets prescribed this drug, and he really starts to struggle with the drug. She goes on a business trip, and she's called. He committed suicide. Again, in response to the drug Zoloft. So she becomes an advocate, and she's on the FDA advisory committee. She's a consumer representative, and she's had to testify in front of Congress, and she's been a very vocal advocate for what these drugs do. And again, it's kept out of the mainstream, so we only know what we know. We only know what we're exposed to. So if we're not provided this information on the nightly news or social media, if that narrative isn't created for us, it doesn't exist in our consciousness. So, I mean, it's really just about that these drugs are safe, and these suicides, the violence, all these other things, they're not related to the drug. They're related to guns or something else, right? You know that it's a narrative that's pushed to take gun rights away because the U.S. government and one particular party in general push that narrative whenever there's a school shooting, and not looking deeper into who these kids were and how they were treated in the medical system and what drugs they're on at the given time and what are the ramifications of that.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right. The Higherside Chat Show.